Well, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining today's call. My name is John Baird. Ontario's heritage, sport, tourism, and culture industries represent a combined economic impact of $75 billion, hundreds of thousands of jobs, and are critical to our province's diverse culture and social fabric. Your Minister, Lisa MacLeod, Ontario's first Minister of Heritage, Sport, Tourism, and Cultural Industries, has been a steadfast advocate for the sector since assuming her role in June of 2019. And I know she has been working diligently, speaking with many of you over the past number of weeks as the COVID-19 pandemic unfolds. Today, we're here to address some of the challenges you face as a result of the COVID-19. We recognize that heritage, sports, tourism, and culture industries have been uniquely impacted, including losses to revenue, employment, and many other issues resulting from the pandemic in communities right across the province. Many of you have already submitted your questions in advance, and we'll do our very best to get to as many of them as possible. If there is time remaining, and there will be, we will make sure we get open the lines up for questions to be facilitated by the operator. To begin today's telephone town hall, I'd like to turn it over to Minister Lisa MacLeod for her opening remarks. Minister.
Thanks very much, John. It's so wonderful to have you moderate my fifth telephone town hall for a number of reasons. And first, for those on the call who may not be aware, I succeeded John in the PN as the local MPP. So obviously today is very special for me. Second, obviously, John was in the Ontario cabinet during 9/11 as well as SARS. He was also in the federal cabinet during the recession and the war in Afghanistan. So, John, I know your understanding and empathy in a crisis is very important to me and our industry partners. So thanks very much for joining us. And John, you alluded to the contributions that this ministry makes. But before I get started, I wanted to share with you a little bit about this ministry and our industry and sectoral partners. Pre-COVID-19, we were responsible for a spectacular double bottom line. Namely, we preserve, protect, and promote Ontario's unique cultural fabric and the social impact of our communities, while at the same time contributing to $75 billion in economic activity. That's larger than the GDP of Manitoba and greater than the mining, agricultural, and forestry sectors in Ontario combined. We've supported young athletes like Penny Alexiak and Rosie McLennan, talented young artists like Shawn Mendes, productions like Come From Away, Schitt's Creek, and even Umbrella Academy. We work with Air Canada, the Toronto Maple Leafs, and Canada's Wonderland, while supporting fishing lodges in the north, resorts in Muskoka, and festivals like the Tulip Festival in our hometown of Ottawa. The people on this call truly make Ontario a special place to work, live, and play. And right now, they are hurting. What makes Ontario special is right now hanging by a thread. The folks on this call were first hit in COVID-19. They were hardest hit with COVID-19 in the economy and will likely take the longest to recover. Our stakeholders estimate that our sectors lost $17.6 billion already for 2020. C.D. Howe Institute tells us that 4 of the 7 hardest hit sectors are partners to this ministry. They also suggest 350,000 of the 400,000 jobs lost in March come from the job creators on this call. That's why it's so important that we continue to work together. Now, friends, since we last met, a number of things have occurred. We have taken steps to extend the emergency order. The legislature has reconvened. We slowly began to reopen the economy this past weekend. A number of my ministerial advisory committees have neared completion of their interim work, and we announced schools would not reopen. I understand that each phase of the COVID-19 raises additional questions with respect to what stages to reopen the economy. In the past, I was able to announce our 10-point plan. I was able to announce specific funding, and I was able to introduce our ministerial advisory committees and talk about our workplace safety specific guidelines for our industry. In the past few weeks, I have been able to greenlight the return of professional sport training and conditioning, starting with our world champions, the Toronto Raptors. And yesterday, I announced that our high-performance athletes who compete in the Olympics and World Championships could begin their training and conditioning as well. In both cases, Ontario became the first jurisdiction in Canada and among the few in North America to do so. So let me start with a sport update. As you're aware, the federal government has earmarked money for the provinces to support the flow of money to our provincial sport organizations. I want to assure you that my team is working diligently with the federal government through our bilateral agreement to flow that money. We expect to receive 40% of the $32 million that was announced. In the meantime, however, I'm announcing today that the following money, over $20 million, will flow direct from my ministry immediately as we continue to support sport in Ontario. So specifically, Ontario's after-school programs will receive $13.12 million. Our provincial sport organizations will start to see money flow in the tune of $4.15 million. Youth culture camps are $2.5 million. Indigenous sport and wellness in Ontario will receive $1.6 million. Community Aboriginal Recreation Activator will receive $1.2 million. The 2020 Ontario Summer Games will receive $425,000. The 2020 Ontario 55 Plus Summer Games will receive $64,000. Variety Village will receive $1 million. The 2020 Ontario Winter Games will receive $125,000. 2021 Ontario Parasport Games will receive $10,000, and our Ontario Senior Games Association will receive $110,000. So again, today we are committed to flowing $20 million for sport across the province, despite the fact that those sporting events at the moment have either been canceled or postponed, and that our children in minor sports are unable to play. I also understand you are wondering when the province will work to lift restrictions on minor sports so kids can get back to safe play. I assure you that our Ministerial Advisory Committee is working on guidelines and that we are engaging Own the Podium, Coaches Canada, and National Sporting Associations so that each sport has rigorous protocols in place to ensure the safety and well-being of all athletes, their coaches, parents, and volunteers. Yesterday, the Canadian Sport Institute and Own the Podium briefed me on their risk assessment tool and their mitigation strategies that will inform this work. It was developed in conjunction with the WHO and international standards. Let me say this, when it is safe to play, Ontario will be able to ensure our young athletes play safe. Finally, on sport, I'm announcing today $34.8 million in capital funding to the Canada 2021 Games to be held in Niagara. 2021 will be a marquee year for the province as we support athletic events like the Canada Games and the Grey Cup, as well as others to ensure we can both celebrate our athletes and, as importantly, rebuild our tourism economy. Moving to tourism and culture, as promised, we would continue to flow money through OCAF, the Ontario Arts Council, and Celebrate. Today, I will be releasing the first in festival funding for those who qualified, so they will be reimbursed for eligible sunk costs. My team will flow nearly $9.8 million this week, and we will continue to work with events and festivals on how we can best support them in this new environment when it is safe to do so. I recognize cancellations have been difficult for event organizers and their communities, which is why we are committed to continually assessing and adapting to the new reality prior to the fall budget in the province. Today, we're also going to be flowing money to 166 community museums for a total of $5 million. 176 heritage organizations will receive $1 million, and 380 public libraries will receive $21 million. Over $21 million will be distributed to the Art Gallery of Ontario and an additional $4 million for the Royal Botanical Gardens. In total today in heritage, sport, tourism, and culture industries, we are flowing $128.5 million beginning this week to support the important work that you're all doing to support the cultural fabric and identity of Ontario, while at the same time contributing to that spectacular double bottom line of $75 billion suite of sectors. This is in addition to the $1.5 million for the Tourism Development and Recovery Fund, which is now open, the $9 million Music Fund, which launches this month, and the $67 million we continue to flow through the Ontario Trillium Foundation. Since COVID-19, despite most of our industry and sectoral partners being shuttered, the ministry will flow $206 million to support heritage, sport, tourism, and culture in Ontario. I've said that many times that the creative class through our artists, athletes, and attractions will shape the post-COVID-19 economy and cultural identity of Ontario and Canada. And I want to assure you that your Ontario government, especially myself and Premier Doug Ford, are committed to supporting you in that. So I'm happy to take any questions, John, and looking forward to getting to speak with some of the great people that we've been able to work with.
Great. Thank you very much, Minister. We've got a lot of questions that have been submitted ahead of time. I'll line off a few of them, and then we'll invite people to ask a live question. I'll just remind people that you just can press 3 to ask a live question. But let's go right to the pre-submitted questions. We have a question from Megan Guerra of the City of Brampton. will any of the upcoming reopening phases include changes to crowd sizes for gatherings?
Sure. Thanks, John, and thank you, Megan. Obviously, this is an issue that we will be dealing with the Chief Medical Officer of Health as well as our Ministry of Labor, and so these are conversations that we're continually having. As noted in the framework to reopening our province, stage one includes workplaces that can allow public health guidance immediately. So we will continue to take key public health indicators to guide our progress on next steps. So clearly, social distancing is required, and we're going to continue, hopefully, the containment of COVID-19. But I think you would agree, in order for us to have a successful 2021 and to salvage what we can of 2020, we should take a cautious, balanced approach to the economic reopening so that will lower the risk of further outbreaks. Public health experts will continually monitor throughout each stage so we can continue to benefit from the best practices and lessons learned. And in the gradual reopening in stage one, if it's successful, we can then move to stage 2 and 3 and expand social gatherings on the advice of those public health officials. I will tell you, and I'm hoping Erin Benjamin is on the line from Canadian Live Music. Her and I know Alan Reid from the Junos are looking at my music panel, and obviously we'd like to see live music back in some shape or form. And we've been talking about the idea of drive-through and drive-in entertainment, and so that's something that I'm engaging my colleagues with around the cabinet table and the caucus table, and it's also something that I think could really inspire some semblance of normalcy for our live music industry. And I would be remiss if I didn't say thanks to Music Canada and the great work that Graham Henderson is doing in providing us with real-time data on what live gatherings will look like and what the hesitancy might be in terms of the broader public. So we do have a lot of work to do. The long answer is the one I just gave. The short answer is I think it's too early to tell. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question comes from Sarah Farrell, Pinewood, Toronto Studios. Will film and television production form part of phase 2 of reopening? And when will we have the clarity on safety guidelines and requirements for production?
Listen, thanks very much, Sarah. That's a great question. I do hope John Weber's well. He was telling me and texting me earlier this week about some of the great work that you're continuing to do with CBS and others. So just so you know, in terms of phase 1, we were able to open post-production and animation for the province, which is really important. Our Film and Television Advisory Committee continues to do some really great work in terms of streamlining our tax credit system, building capacity. They've got some great ideas there in terms of how we get that back up and running. Encouraging greater Canadian content. For those of you on the line who aren't familiar with all of the film and television background of the industry, we grew the economy between 2018 and 2019 by $300 million, from $1.9 billion to $2.16 billion, and almost all of that came from domestic content, so that's important. And we're going to continue to build on the importance of skilled labor. In terms of which phase that is in, I'm continually having conversations with John as well as Stratagem and Triborough and others on what that might look like and what kind of best practices. I can tell you 2 weeks ago I met with the Motion Picture Association, so it included Viacom, CBS, Disney. We were meeting, I believe, with NBC Universal and so many others to talk about what a return to film and TV would look like in Ontario. Obviously, those executives were from New York and from Los Angeles, so we'll continue to do that. And just earlier in the week, I had an in-depth interview with the LA Times, positioning Ontario for when it's safe to do so. I'll continue to be your advocate around the table to make sure that when it's safe to do so, that film and television production are up and running as quickly as possible. And Christina Jennings and Jim Mercopoulos have ably led that group, and yesterday had the opportunity to meet with me, our officials, and a couple of our fellow cabinet ministers. So I hope that answers your question, Sarah, but really, really appreciate it.
The next question, before we go live questions, is from Svetlana Rogal with the Ontario Weightlifting Association. Can provincial sport organizations start scheduling competitions?
Yeah, so I don't think we're at that point yet. I wish we were. I think the guidelines will come down from your national associations on when it's safe to do so in terms of sanitization and proper distancing and other protocols. The area in terms of the NBA, the Major League Soccer, as well as our high-performance athletes that compete at the Olympics and the World Championships, is their facilities are available now have that high degree of medical sanitation, and they do have the appropriate social distancing protocols in place. So they are greenlit to go, and they obviously all have medical professionals on site. So those protocols will be coming down the pipe probably in June for broader minor sports and amateur sport across the province. But we remain committed, obviously, to working with you as well as public health officials to see how we can advance. We will also take heed from international examples, and I'm just really proud that we've got a group led by the former president and CEO of the Ottawa Senators, Cyril Leader, and the head of the Canadian Sport Institute of Ontario, Debbie Lowe, working with a committed group of people to make sure that those rigorous protocols are in place so that when it's safe to return to play, that we will play safely in the province. So thanks very much.
Great. Minister, let's go to the operator and take our first live question.
We have our first live question coming up. Just a quick reminder to everyone joining us, if you'd like to ask a live question, you can do so by pressing 3 on your phone's keypad. We're going to start by going to Matthew, who's joining us live. Matthew, please go ahead with your question and introduce yourself and your organization.
Thank you very much. My name is Matthew Lund. I own my own law firm, Powell's Law, and I represent Big Daddy Gary Goodridge, who is probably Ontario's most famous mixed martial arts fighter. Your Premier Ford made the comment in his budget that he wanted to open up Ontario as a world-class MMA destination, and just wondering about consultation with Gary being the most prominent fighter and most prolific fighter, especially considering what legislation would need to be. Is there any plans to actually have any kind of consultation with Gary and local mixed martial arts organizations in order to open that up? And just a second follow-up question. In terms of the drive-in event style, do you have a timeline on that? And, like, when might we be able to perhaps have drive-in style of events?
Yeah, thanks. Look, I think your first question is hyper-specific in terms of a consultation and meeting, so happy to offline have my staff reach out to you, Matthew, and set that up with our amateur sport team and get that going. We also have a combat sports table, I believe, that's been set up. So happy to do that. Obviously, half the people on this phone probably have my personal cell phone number. So obviously, we like to consult and we like to engage with our folks. So that would be great. And in terms of the drive-through and drive-in, you know, we've had some interesting proposals from zoos across the province, from live music. So it's certainly something that the ministry is proposing to the command center to see when it might be safe to do so. The big challenge, obviously, will be washrooms and that sanitation we just talked about with respect to, wrestling with the wrestling group. Is how do you make sure that we have the appropriate level of sanitation in the common areas, whether that's concession stands or washrooms, that sort of thing. And I know that in some areas across the province, you're starting to see these things pop up, and that simply is the municipality or the city is not enforcing their own bylaw or the provincial order. And so we want to make sure that there is some clarity. So my hope is if my ADM is listening, that these are something that we've asked for to provide some guidance, and it's something I think that has piqued the interest of folks. So long answer is we're working on it, and it's something that I'm very passionate about. Short answer is I think time will continue to tell as we look toward public health officials informing us on safety and health guidelines.
Minister, the next question comes from Kelly Stahl with the City of Bradford. Will there be new funding available for capital projects that support art, culture, and tourism infrastructure?
Yeah, thanks very much for that question. Obviously, I'm very impressed with working with the culture industries, and so I'm also excited about working with our agency, the Ontario Arts Council. So they're currently working to advance the 2020-21 operating grants as soon as possible so that we can ensure the sector receives immediate support. So the annual investment that we make each year in the Ontario Arts Council is $60 million. We'll continue to flow that $60 million again this year. And of course, a couple of projects that I announced today through our agencies that report to the ministry, obviously, is the funding for the Art Gallery of Ontario as well as the Royal Botanical Gardens. So we're investing today $21 million to those two organizations to position them for the recovery. And we'll continue to invest additional resources for Ontario arts and heritage culture industries.
Great. Operator, let's go for another live question.
We have another one ready to go. This one will be from Eleanor. Eleanor, welcome. You're joining us live.
Hi there, it's Eleanor Walker from the Grape Growers of Ontario. First, I'd just like to thank you for the time and dedication that your ministry has put into being transparent as we work through this. Looking forward to recovery, agri-food tourism is a huge component of ensuring a sustainable grape supply. And I was wondering if your ministry is looking at ways to support growers and agri-tourism as reduced foot traffic will result in a lower demand for our local grapes.
Yeah, listen, thanks, Eleanor. I had a great call last week with a number of you folks, with Todd Smith, the MPP in the Quinte area, as well as the MPP for Niagara, Sam Oosterhoff, and of course, Minister Smith is also the Minister of Community and Social Services. So he and I work quite closely together just to talk about those two areas. And what I've asked is when we develop our plan for the ministry, not just a tourism strategy, I think it's got to incorporate every single element of this ministry and how we recover and reposition and then eventually reopen over 2020 to 2025 strategy. And I firmly believe, and I know probably the Culinary Alliance is on the call, but I really believe that there's an opportunity for culinary and craft tourism strategy specific, hyper-specific, so that when it's safe to do so, we can open Ontario to the rest of the world. The other area that I think that we have an opportunity is to start selling more local. And one of the initiatives that we've talked about several times on this call is Ontario.live, which we've not yet launched, but I keep talking about it, and having an opportunity for people to take reservations now for when it's safe to do so, or pre-purchase and have orders for. And so we're completely committed to working with you, the craft distilleries, the craft breweries, as well as our wonderful chefs and our agritourism folks to build a great strategy as we move forward to really promote and preserve what we've got in many of our rural communities. But even John, and your old constituency office was in Bell's Corners when I worked for you back in the day, now has two craft breweries. So it's really starting to sprout up even in the major urban centers. So I think we have a really good opportunity here, and it's one that really excites me. And I would be one as we start to look at liberalizing our liquor and wine laws is to see if there's a way for us to continue to promote that in other creative ways. And so I've been an advocate for that for quite some time.
Well, I have my own way, Minister, of supporting the Ontario grape growers, and that's visiting the LCBO and picking up a nice bottle.
Good for you.
The next question we'll go to is from Karen Brochu from the House of Anansi. Does the ministry plan on expediting Ontario Arts Council funding so businesses can receive their funding earlier than usual?
Yeah, we've been working almost since day one with the Ontario Arts Council to make sure that they can do that advance. I know some of their deadlines have been changed, but we continue to work with them. We recognize that liquidity and having access to cash now is really important, and in order to continue to allow our arts and culture partners to continue to thrive and succeed post COVID-19 and to survive at the moment. So that money will be flowing, and again, I think I answered it before, but we are continuing to maintain that annual investment of $60 million. I recognize how far it goes. John, one of the cool things about this ministry is looking at every dollar we invest and how many more dollars are created in the communities. And so when you have a festival, and I'll just keep using the Tulip Festival because you and I love it here at home, is every time I invest $1 into the Tulip Festival in normal times, we get 21 back. And that's why Ottawa is a tourism capital of one of the tourism capitals of Ontario, and obviously Niagara, Muskoka, Blue Mountain, Gananoque, and Toronto, and others. Every time we support them that way, we continue to grow the economy. It's very cool. So that's why I remain really committed to the Ontario Arts Council.
Great. Operator, let's go for another live call.
We have our next live question coming up, and it's going to be from David. David, welcome. You're joining us live.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. And Minister, thank you for doing this. It's very informative. I own a sports marketing firm. We work across Canada with community sports primarily. We also work at the pro level as well. My question is, return to play for community sport is a big concern. Mayor Toronto, I think yesterday mentioned that community arenas may open in July. Are you able at this time to elaborate on that timing and on any protocol as to how and when will sports return for kids at the community level?
Yeah, listen, no one is asking that question to me more than my own daughter, Victoria, and I think I've said it on previous calls. Her birthday was the 12th of March, and her hockey tournament was canceled on the 12th of March because her mother, the Minister of Sport, told her it would be, and it took a while for her to forgive me, and she's been asking me day in and day out. Look, the simple answer is no, I don't have that information. I think that it's too early to say. Having said that, I want to assure you that we are continuing to work with all of our public health officials, our workplace safety officials, because obviously, workers will be there, as well as Coaches Canada Own the Podium and other national sport organizations to develop those guidelines. We are getting closer, and as I said, I think in my remarks, working with Own the Podium and the Canadian Sport Institute, we were able to look and see what the risk assessment tool was, as well as what mitigation would look like. And so obviously we are now doing that with with our high performance athletes as well as our professional athletes. But it's simply only for training and conditioning at this point. We have not opened or greenlit anything in terms of resume to play. So we're going to continue to work on it. We're going to make sure that when we do reopen that we can do it safely. And we're happy if you have any suggestions, we'll accept those. But that work is ongoing. And again, I think we'll continue to work with our municipalities as well, because many of those facilities are municipally owned.
Great, operator. Let's go for another live question.
We have our next one ready to go. A quick reminder to everyone joining us, press 3 on your phone's keypad if you would like to ask a live question. We're going now to Dana. Dana, welcome. Please go ahead.
Hi, Minister. My name is Dana Bennett, and I'm from the Dryden Public Library. Last week, we heard an announcement from the province that libraries can resume curbside pickup, and we know that the ministry has been very engaged with library stakeholders and the Ontario Library Association. And I'm just wondering if you could speak a bit about the rollout for public library reopening and support for public libraries.
Sure, and thanks very much, Dana. That's a great question. It took us a little bit longer than I would have liked to have the curbside pickup for our libraries, but that was simply because we couldn't earlier on commit to knowing what the spread of the virus might look like after a book was returned. So I think that now has been satisfied. So we're happy to do that. And again, today we're happy to make sure that our 380 public libraries will receive a total of $21 million starting to flow this week. In terms of when you may more broadly be based in terms of opening, we've got a committee that's looking at our public libraries, museums, and local attractions. And Troy Young of Attractions Canada, or Ontario, is leading that along with Marie Lalonde from the Ontario Museum Network. And they're specifically looking at what a return to opening would appear to be in that time frame, and certainly we'll continue to work with our public health officials. And as you know, I'm on the Economic and Jobs Recovery Cabinet Committee, and so we're looking at in terms of what these phases may also appear to be. So as more information comes available, as we continue to contain the spread of COVID-19, and as health and safety protocols become more commonplace, we'll be able to tell you at that point in time. But I think, unfortunately, right now it's too early to say. But we're continuing to monitor that, and we're continuing to work on it. And when it is safe to do so, we'll make sure you guys are among the first to know.
And we have another submitted question from Anthony Plummer from the Caribbean Promotions, Arts and Culture. Will festivals like ours that are planning to go virtual be supported by Celebrate Ontario?
Yeah, listen, thanks very much, Anthony. Of course, our government's committed to providing flexibility to grant recipients as you rethink your events, whether you're pivoting to online or alternate programming, postponing to a later date, or canceling in order to focus on next year's event. So, again, we committed today to flow over $9 million to those festivals that have had to cancel or postpone to deal with their eligible and sunk costs. You know, we want you to be here in 2021 when Ontario starts to reclaim its rightful place as a tourism destination in North America, and you're going to be a very big part of that success. And so we just want to make sure that there is that level of flexibility. We're going to continue to work with the federal government as well. They announced over $1 billion for tourism and hospitality, and a lot of that money, of course, will come to Ontario through some of their economic development agencies. So we're continuing to track that to see how we can support you as well. but it obviously is very important that we continue to build capacity in our communities to celebrate what makes us unique. I say we're the world in one province. I think we need to celebrate that, and I'm very committed and enthusiastic about doing so.
And just a reminder to press 3 to ask a live question, and we'll go to another live question, operator.
Up next, we have Madeleine, who's joining us now. Madeleine, welcome.
Good morning, Minister. I'm with the Cumberland Township Agricultural Society, and I was wondering when the Celebrate Ontario applicants might hear about their grant proposals.
If it is not today, it will certainly be this week. And so I can ask my deputy if that's already going to be online today. Nancy?
Morning, everybody.
So we'll make it. Oh, there she is. Hey, Nancy.
Sorry. Hey. Yes, indeed, that's exactly right, Minister. We are 99% teed up in terms of that, and so you're exactly right in terms of the timing.
Excellent. So there you have it. We'll have our Celebrate money out this week and announced. And thanks, by the way, Madeleine, from being from our hometown, just across the city over in Cumberland.
Operator, let's go for another call.
We have another live question. It's coming up from George. George, welcome.
Good morning. I'm George Acorn, the Director of Community Services in the municipality of Clarington in Durham Region. Good morning, Minister.
Good morning.
I was wondering if you could provide us an update on the status of the applications on the Investing in Canada infrastructure program, specifically the community culture and recreation stream. The applications, I believe, closed in November 2019, and I believe this would be an excellent program for the economic stimulus of the province and the country.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, George. I think the ISIP is very important. As you know, the federal government and us to combine along with either our municipalities or our private organizations have committed to $1 billion in Ontario. That program was oversubscribed. I think we had $13 billion worth of requests for $1 billion. So how that process worked was effectively that this ministry, Heritage, Sport, Tourism and Culture Industries, evaluated the projects on the ground in each one of the regions, and then submitted that to Infrastructure Ontario. So that is actually going to be decided by Infrastructure Ontario, and it's currently on the desk of our Minister of Infrastructure, the Honourable Lisa MacLeod. So my office continues to work with them. I know that Minister Scott has been working with Minister McKenna on what infrastructure rollouts might look like. But in terms of that particular stream, our ministry effectively did the evaluation, but the decision will be made over at Infrastructure, as that's where the money is sitting at the moment.
Minister, here we are. Minister, here's a question from John Baird. When do you expect hospitality sector to begin reopening in the province?
Well, you know what? It has slightly started in the sense that we were able to allow the delivery of unopened alcohol at restaurants, and that's starting to happen. The Minister of Labour, the Honourable Monty McNaughton, has over 90 different protocols put in place for workplace safety and the health of the clientele, but also the workers, and that certainly includes hospitality and hotels. Right now, our hotel industry is operating at about 3%, and for an $8.9 billion sector, that has been absolutely devastating. And I know most of our restaurants have been struggling not only to keep their doors open, but also to make sure that they are able to deal with their commercial rent. And so we're trying to ease as much as we can for them and make sure that they're around post-COVID-19. So obviously the ministry wants to encourage a buy local strategy so that we are supporting our local hospitality or food service sector. I have been the beneficiary of receiving my first interim report from my ministry advisory committees from the hotel industry as well as the food service sector, and they've come forward with a number of great ideas and how we can support them. And so that work right now will be done, with my government to see how we can best respond to that. And I just think it's really important as well. The Premier made note yesterday about commercial leases. He effectively said to landlords not to test him, and I think that we're all in this together, and we're all going to get out of this together. So I think it's important that we continue to make sure we protect as many of them as possible. And just one final point there. As we start to launch Ontario.live, we are going to have culinary experiences on that site to support local, whether that's craft culinary or craft distillery and wine and beer, as well as other opportunities for our local hospitality sector and others.
Great. We have another question from Robin Greenall, the Chief Librarian at Essex County. Will there be any grant programs or funding considerations for public libraries to increase and implement our capacity to use of technology to support community access to resources?
Great question. Obviously, the government's committed to maintaining the public library operating grants, so we're flowing that this week. That's about $21 million. So we want to continue to support our public libraries. We recognize that it's important when we're able and safe to do so, that many people in the community convene. And I'm thinking of young mothers taking their newborn or their toddler to the library to give them that first experience. Many of our seniors congregating, to meet with their neighbors and have the conversation. So I think it's important that we continue to support that. We're going to continue to maintain funding to Ontario's 2 library service organizations. And I think it's also worth noting it's important for us to continue to work with the Ministry of Infrastructure, not just on the CCR stream of ISIP, but also to advance Ontario's broadband and cellular action plans so that we can continue to support our public libraries and our rural communities. So the government announced in our 2019 budget, we plan to invest over $315 million over the next 5 years in regional and shovel-ready projects. And certainly we want to make sure that we're positioned in the public library space to take advantage of that.
Question from Justine Barone from the Ontario Federation of Indigenous Friendship Centres. How will the ministry support programming for Indigenous people, such as youth culture camp funding during the COVID-19 crisis?
Thanks very much. Obviously, today I was able to announce that the youth cultural camps will receive $2.5 million to support 10 Indigenous organizations. We can help deliver community-based culture camps across the province. In addition, I've spoken with my colleague, the Honourable Greg Rickford, the Minister of Indigenous Affairs, about hosting a roundtable with those in the Indigenous culture, sport, art, heritage, and tourism sectors. I think that as we move forward in terms of a tourism strategy, as important as it is for a culinary alliance type of strategy, I think we should have one with Francophone affairs as well as Indigenous affairs, and I think that that makes a lot of sense in this new reality. So again, just to point out, we are in Indigenous Sport and Wellness Ontario will receive $1.6 million, and the Ontario Aboriginal Recreation Activator will receive $1.2 million. So I think that we're going to continue to support that area because it's a really important area for us to do that. And in terms of sport, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again, my daughter a few years ago had the opportunity to play hockey against the Res Girls 64 team up from Fort Hope in Northern Ontario, 30-hour drive from Ottawa, a lot of it on ice highway. And to me, I think that as the Ontario chief said at the time, sport is going to be very important, an important part toward reconciliation. And I think that we have that opportunity as we move forward to really do that with our children across Ontario, regardless of where they come from, if it's a big city or a rural and remote community. To make sure that they can see eye to eye through sport. So it's really important for me to make sure that we continue to invest in Ontario's youth cultural camps.
Operator, let's go for another live question.
We have another live question ready to go. A quick reminder to everyone joining us to press 3 on your phone's keypad if you would like to ask a live question. We now have Jennifer, who's joining us live. Jennifer, welcome. Please go ahead.
Good morning. This is Jennifer from Crouch Neighbourhood Resource Centre in London, Ontario. We support the Hamilton Road neighbourhood with community development, basic needs, advocacy, and child and youth programs. I really want to thank you. It's a huge relief to hear about funding for after-school programs. We've continued to employ staff and support low-income children and youth in their homes. And we're currently serving over 100 families a week, which is quite a pivot from our after-school program of about 25 children in person. But my question is if the funding will be flexible based on the greatest need. For example, we are currently restricted our funding to staff salaries, and we've had a few staff that have left because of COVID-19, but our programming budget has really increased. we don't really have the funds to pay for that. And I know it's quite a specific question, but I think more generally, flexibility in these funds and how they're used to meet the needs locally would be very much appreciated and would make a big impact. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. I really appreciate this question. I think it's really important that we continue to support Ontario's after-school programs despite, as of yesterday, obviously school not going back because of the work that you're doing. It's absolutely critical to support particularly children in high-risk neighborhoods. And one of my favorite announcements that I've made in my time as an MPP over the last 15 years was actually recently pre-COVID-19 at the Boys and Girls Club of Ottawa, where we were able to invest in after-school programming and make sure that that we were able to support them and give those kids a hand up. And I recognize right now that despite there not being school, your demands are greater than ever as you continue to support those children. And so I want to make sure that we continue to get that money to flow. And I just want you to know that we're going to work with you to finalize your contract to make sure that you're meeting the needs of the children. And that's critically important to me as a former children minister, as a mother, and as somebody who's seen the great work that you're doing in our after-school programs across the province. So that $13.12 million will flow, and we're going to work with you in order to make sure that it works in the most flexible manner to support the most kids possible. So thank you very much, Jennifer.
And let's take another live call, operator.
We have Yuri joining us now. Yuri, welcome. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, James. And Madame MacLeod, thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Yuri, and I represent the Bloor West Village Ukrainian Festival that happens in September 18th to the 20th every year. My question relates to you as in terms of what aspect of tourism and also cultural media that we're very much dependent upon. We understand from previous conversation today that the Celebrate Ontario information is coming out this week, and we're very grateful for that. What my question is, we're trying to pivot right now between, where we're going to be digital or to what extent we can actually have a real festival. And that depends on how much we can generate tourism. And usually we generate visitors from all across Canada and the United States. And what will be the cultural distancing implementations at the time? The second question relates to cultural media that we're very much dependent upon. And we understand that there, both on a federal and provincial level, there are monies allocated for advertising and promotion, both in relation to COVID-19 as well as general government, provincial, federal advertising. And it seems that the cultural media is somehow being bypassed in relation to those funds being allocated for advertising. And we're, as a festival, very much dependent on that cultural media to exist. Would you have any knowledge or answers for that, Minister?
Yeah, listen, Yuri, great questions, both of them. Let me start with the second one first, because that has been, a bone of contention for me as well. Just simply coming from, representing a riding like the Nepean, where it's a highly diverse population and people aren't listening or going to mainstream media as they once did, because with their cultural media and the connections in their own mother tongue may be different. And so I think it's really important that we continue to support the cultural media. That's why we've got a panel ready to be established on cultural and community media, so that they can guide the ministry and then the broader government as a whole, and how we can best support them in a COVID and post-COVID-19 reality. We also recognize it's important that all outlets have an opportunity to disseminate that information. So that's something that I have raised, obviously, with the government. And I can tell you something, no one is more supportive of this than Premier Ford, who is time and time again made the commitment to the cultural media of his level of support. So that's something that we're working on. With respect to the federal government, I meet each week with Minister Guilbeault, the Minister of Heritage, and I understand that the federal government is also committed to looking at this to see how we can best support you and others as a result of those advertising dollars. And I think right now, as we continue to evolve through this situation, and as we continue to learn more about the virus, its spread, and how we get back eventually to a measured approach to reopening the economy, that's going to be very important. Now, let me get back to your original question, your first question about festival funding. So obviously, over $9 million will go out the door this week. Those that with eligible sunk costs will be notified, and we'll continue to have further discussions about how we support festivals and events on a go forward after this. And again, I think the reason we do that is exactly the reason that you suggested. Do we cancel? Do we postpone? Do we go digital? What do we do? So we want to make sure we're working with you. Again, if you have digital content, we're happy to host that on ontario.live. I'm very proud to make sure that everyone gets to see the great cultural diversity that we have as the world in one province. I think that that's fantastic. And then finally, I think that it's to the point of others at the top of the hour, it's really hard for us to assess what the size of an event may look like so far down the road in September, given there are a whole host of issues that we're going to have to deal with respect to public health and the safety of the workers. So that's a bit too early to tell. I think, though, recognizing the digital content is important at this point in time. That maybe, without giving advice, would be somewhere I might choose to go in these early days. But we also want to make sure you're positioned for 2021. I want everybody on this call thinking about what does 2021 look like for their organization? How do we celebrate Ontario in 2021 when we're finally able to get together and promote our province? And so that would be my clarion call to everybody at this particular time.
Great, Minister. Let's go for one last call. Operator, let's go to the live phone line.
We have Philip, who's joining us live now. Philip, welcome. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Minister MacLeod, for all you and your government are doing to support our sectors. I'm with the Ontario Hockey Federation. And with the announcement on Thursday of Premier Ford and the amendment to the emergency order coming out yesterday, there's some misunderstanding in the media and social media as it relates to rinks and indoor facilities and their ability to open, and further who's eligible to use those rinks and indoor facilities. Will the government be providing further clarification to the order, or and who will be managing the use of those rinks and indoor facilities?
Yeah, listen, Philip, great question. And I know that there was a story out today in the Ottawa Sun that the OHL and that the NHL will be permitted to go back to practice. So here's where we stand with respect to sport. We have cleared and we've greenlit the professional sports organizations that have rigorous standards and protocols in place for training and conditioning, i.e. the only two that have come forward at this point in time, and perhaps the NHL has, I have not seen that, and I speak with MLSE pretty much every day, is the Toronto Raptors and the Major League Soccer. In addition, we said we've greenlit the Canadian Sport Institute, Pan Am Training Center, as well as the Velodrome in Milton for high-performance athletes who compete in the Olympics and Paralympics, as well as the World Championships, because they have medical sanitation grade support as well as healthcare support. Where it pertains to arenas and communities, we will work with the local community organizations, but we're also going to have to take our guidance from national protocols that will be put in place by the national sport organizations. And so that, I suspect, will come in the first week or two of June, based on the briefing I received yesterday from the Canadian Sport Institute and Own the Podium. As I said, they were working with assessment tools, risk assessment tools, as well as mitigation practices, and so that's where we're at. I don't expect that you're going to see a local arena in your community opened up right away. But what we are doing is making sure that the health and safety protocols are in place, both from public health in your community, but also, as importantly, from the Ministry of Labour, who has provided over 90 rigorous sets of protocols that must be met before you open. And as the Premier said last week, and he will, I'm sure, state again, that if you do not follow those protocols that the Ministry of Labour has put out and your local public health officials have put out, you should not open or you should not convene. And so those protocols will be in place. So I hope that eliminates any of the confusion, because I think really, unless you've been actually specifically greenlit at this point, you probably shouldn't be, convening.
Great. Well, Minister, thank you for sharing your insights, and more importantly, thanks for your leadership and your strong advocacy for the sectors within your ministry. Before we wrap up, I'd like to just offer you an opportunity to make some closing remarks.
All right. Well, listen, first of all, I want to say thank you to you, John. What an opportunity for me and an honor to have you join us today. Someone of your stature and experience and expertise in everything provincial and federal politics in this country, and have a deep understanding of our files is really, I'm really grateful for. I'd like to say thanks to everybody who took the time to be on the call today. I think we had well over 800, and that's obviously very important to me as we continue to communicate in the most effective manner that we can have at this particular time and build those relationships. I know that sometimes my sectors think, okay, she's only talking about film and television, or next week she's only talking about music, or the next week she's only talking about tourism, or the next week she's only talking about sport. I assure you, you all have my equal and undivided attention. I've said this before and I'll say it again. I've been preparing for COVID-19 since January the 25th. I never expected it to be quite as stark as it hit us on the 12th of March. But I can tell you what keeps me up at night but gets me back up in the morning is making sure that when we come out of this, each one of you around this virtual telephone town hall are back doing what you do best, and that's contributing to our economy. I've said it before as well, that I believe post-COVID-19, everyone on this call will help shape the future cultural identity of the province of Ontario and Canada, but as importantly, will help shape the new economy that we have. And so I want everyone to feel a sense of optimism. I know that it's hard sometimes because people are losing their businesses, or they're worried that their festival won't reopen, or they don't know when their hockey team is going to get back on the ice. It will happen eventually. We'll get back to some semblance of normal, or a new normal, or a new reality. But we're going to do that together, and that's why I'm committed to working with my 14 ministerial advisory committees. That's why I'm committed to making sure my colleagues in the cabinet, as well as throughout the Ontario legislature, get to know our suite of sectors and industries as well as they have, and that's why I'm committed to not only building our relationship but continuing it. And so again, we are available. We will do our best. We're imperfect, just like everybody else. But our goal and what we aspire to do is to make sure that your voices are heard, and we support you the best possible way we can, and understanding that sometimes that's with dollars and cents, but sometimes it's regulatory reform. Sometimes it's just clearing the air about what one policy may mean and what may not. We're happy to be there for you, and I hope that you'll continue to work with us as we build to get out of COVID-19 and its disastrous effects that it has had on our suite of sectors. So with that, John, thank you so much, and thanks to everybody else that was on the call.
Again, thanks for your time, Minister, and I want to thank everyone for joining today's call. The Minister and her team will receive all the questions that you submitted to help inform their communications going forward. We'd also like to remind you that representatives at the Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism, and Culture Industries are available to support you and your organization as this pandemic continues to unfold. Again, to everyone, thanks for joining today's call.
And lastly, if you do have any questions or any feedback that you would like to share with Minister MacLeod and the Ministry, you can do so by emailing minister.macleod@ontario.ca. Just a reminder, you can email questions and feedback to us at minister.macleod@ontario.ca. Thank you again, and have a good afternoon.